By the spring of 1945, the German Reich controlled less territory than it had in 1939. The man who promised 1,000 years had 6 weeks left to live. And the question that still haunts military historians isn't how Hitler lost. It's how he managed to throw away every advantage he ever had. We're about to walk through the anatomy of the most catastrophic military collapse in modern history. You'll see the exact moments where victory turned to ash. You'll learn the name of the general who begged Hitler to retreat and was sent to a death camp for it. And buried in the final act of this story is a detail so strange that when Soviet officers first reported it, Moscow assumed they were drunk. This isn't about inevitable justice or moral arcs. This is about a war machine that conquered a continent in 2 years and then tore itself apart from the inside faster than any Allied bomb could manage. By the time we're done, you'll know precisely which decisions killed the Third Reich, and how many of them Hitler made while everyone in the room knew they were insane. The unraveling starts long before the bunker. It starts in the snow. The Eastern Front doesn't break Germany. It digests Germany. Slowly. Over 3 years. And the first bite happens in the winter of 1941, outside a city that wasn't supposed to matter. Moscow was supposed to fall in 8 weeks. Operation Barbarossa launched on June 22nd. The panzers rolled. 3 million men crossed the border, the largest invasion force ever assembled. And for 4 months, it worked exactly as planned. The Red Army shattered. Entire Soviet divisions evaporated. By October, German reconnaissance units could see the spires of the Kremlin through their field glasses. Then the weather turned. The mud came first. The Rasputitsa, the season of impassable roads. Tanks sank to their turrets. Supply trucks abandoned in place. Horses drowned standing up in the slop. And then the mud froze. And the temperature kept dropping. -20, -30, -40 degrees Celsius. German soldiers had summer uniforms. The Wehrmacht had planned for an 8-week campaign. No winter coats were issued. No antifreeze for the vehicles. The oil in the panzers turned to paste, and the Soviets counterattacked. Fresh Siberian divisions. 100,000 men pulled from the east because Stalin's spies in Tokyo confirmed Japan wouldn't invade. Troops who knew how to fight in snow. And suddenly the unstoppable Wehrmacht was running. Not retreating tactically, running. For the first time since 1939, German infantry threw away their rifles and fled. Hitler's generals begged him to pull back, consolidate, shorten the line, survive the winter and attack again in spring. Field Marshal von Bock put the request in writing. General Guderian flew to headquarters personally to explain that the front would collapse without a withdrawal. Hitler said no. He issued a stand-fast order. Every man holds his position. No retreats. Any officer who pulls back without written permission will be court-martialed and shot. And then he fired von Bock and Guderian and took personal command of the army himself. Here's the thing. The stand-fast order worked. Barely. The line held. The retreat didn't turn into a rout. And Hitler learned the worst possible lesson, that his instinct was better than his general's expertise, that willpower could substitute for logistics, that he was a military genius who had just saved Germany from Napoleon's fate. He would apply that lesson again and again, until the entire Eastern Front was a mass grave. The Soviets lost 27 million people in the Second World War, more than every other Allied nation combined. 12 million of them were soldiers. 15 million were civilians. Those numbers are so large they stop meaning anything. So let's make it small. The siege of Leningrad lasted 900 days. The Germans surrounded the city in September 1941 and didn't lift the siege until January 1944. 2.5 years. Hitler's explicit order was to starve the city into submission. No ground assault, just wait for them to die. The first winter, People ate the wallpaper paste. The glue was made from potatoes. Then they ate leather, belts, shoes, the bindings of books. Then they ate the dead. Soviet authorities documented over 2,000 arrests for cannibalism during the siege. The real number was higher. People stopped reporting it. By the time the siege lifted, 1 million people had starved to death. One city, 1 million corpses. The Nazis didn't gas them or shoot them. They just stopped food from getting in and waited. And Leningrad was one city. The Eastern Front ran from the Baltic to the Black Sea. 4,000 kilometers of combat. Villages burned as a matter of policy. Entire populations executed or shipped to labor camps. The Einsatzgruppen, mobile killing squads, followed behind the Wehrmacht and systematically murdered every Jew, communist, and intellectual they could find. Over 1 million people shot and buried in pits before the gas chambers were even operational. This is what Germany was doing while it was winning. The logistical cost was apocalyptic. Every mile east stretched the supply lines longer. Every village burned meant no food for the troops. Every civilian murdered meant no labor for the factories. The Wehrmacht was conquering a wasteland and calling it victory. And the deeper they pushed, the more men it took to hold what they'd taken. By the summer of 1942, Hitler had learned nothing. He launched Case Blue, the offensive toward the Caucasus oil fields. The objective was Stalingrad, a city on the Volga River, industrially important, strategically useful, and named after Stalin, which meant Hitler wanted it flattened for symbolic reasons more than military ones. The battle started in August. The Luftwaffe firebombed the city until it looked like the surface of the moon. Then the infantry moved in. Urban combat. House to house, room to room. The Soviets didn't retreat. They dug into the rubble and fought for every staircase. A German officer wrote that they'd captured a kitchen, but the Russians still held the bedroom. The front line ran through individual apartments. Months of this. The casualties piled up faster than either side could count them. And then in November, the Soviets launched Operation Uranus, a double envelopment. Pincers closing around the entire German 6th Army. 300,000 men trapped in a pocket with no supply line. General Paulus radioed Hitler. The situation is untenable. Request permission to break out while we still can. Hitler's response. The 6th Army will hold Stalingrad. Supplies will be delivered by air. No breakout, no surrender. Goering promised the Luftwaffe could deliver 500 tons of supplies per day, the minimum to keep the army functional. They never delivered more than 100. Most days it was less than 50. Planes shot down. Weather too bad to fly. Fuel shortages. The men in the pocket started eating the horses, then the leather, then each other. Paulus surrendered in February 1943. 91,000 Germans marched into Soviet captivity. Fewer than 6,000 ever came home. The rest died in the camps or on the forced marches east, starved, frozen, worked to death. Hitler had thrown away an entire army because retreating felt like losing. The pattern was set, and it would repeat until there was nothing left to throw away. The air war over Germany starts as a nuisance, becomes a crisis, ends as an apocalypse. The first RAF bombers arrive over Berlin in 1940. Small raids, mostly symbolic. The damage is negligible. Hitler barely notices. He's too busy planning the invasion of Russia. But Churchill keeps sending them, month after month. The raids get larger, more planes, heavier bombs, and the Luftwaffe, which spent 1940 getting mauled over Britain, can't stop them all. By 1942, the RAF has switched to night bombing. Entire fleets, hundreds of Lancasters and Halifaxes dropping incendiaries and high explosives on industrial cities. The doctrine is simple. Destroy the factories, kill the workers, break German morale. Arthur Harris, the man running Bomber Command, calls it dehousing. The explicit goal is to make German cities uninhabitable. Cologne, Hamburg, Essen. The Ruhr Valley turns into a crematorium. And then the Americans join in. Daylight bombing. B-17s in formations so large they blot out the sun. The 8th Air Force goes after oil refineries, ball bearing plants, rail yards. Precision bombing in theory. In practice, entire neighborhoods vanish. The firebombing of Hamburg in July 1943 creates a weather phenomenon the Allies didn't know was possible. The incendiaries land so densely that the fires merge into a single thermal column. Superheated air rises. Cold air rushes in to replace it. Winds of 150 kilometers per hour. A fire tornado that reaches temperatures of 800 degrees Celsius. Asphalt melts. People caught in the open burst into flame without being touched by fire. 40,000 dead in one night. The British call it Operation Gomorrah. The German survivors call it the Firestorm. And it doesn't stop. Dresden, Berlin, Munich. Every major city hit again and again. The Luftwaffe bleeds itself white trying to defend the homeland. Experienced pilots die faster than replacements can be trained. Fuel shortages ground entire squadrons. By 1944, the Allies have air superiority over Germany itself. American fighters escort the bombers all the way to the target and back. German interceptors that manage to take off get shredded. Hitler's response is to double down on wonder weapons, the V-1 flying bomb, the V-2 rocket. Jet fighters that arrive too late and in too few numbers. He pours resources into experimental designs while his existing air force disintegrates. The Me-262 jet could change the air war if it had been mass-produced as a fighter. Hitler ordered it modified into a bomber, a faster way to hit London. Strategically pointless, tactically insane. The German war economy was supposed to collapse under the bombing. It didn't. Production actually increased until late 1944. Albert Speer, the armaments minister, decentralized the factories, moved them underground, worked the slave laborers harder. But the transportation network couldn't survive. Rail lines cut, bridges destroyed, canal locks blown, synthetic oil plants obliterated. By early 1945, the Panzers had no fuel. The Luftwaffe had planes it couldn't fly. And the cities were graveyards. 360,000 German civilians killed by Allied bombing. The strategic effect is debatable. The psychological effect is not. The German people stopped believing in victory long before the army did. The question historians still argue about: did the bombing campaign shorten the war, or just make the rubble bounce? The answer is both, and neither. Because by the time the bombs mattered, Hitler had already lost the war somewhere else. North Africa was supposed to be a sideshow. It turned into a bleeding ulcer. Mussolini invades Egypt in 1940 with delusions of rebuilding the Roman Empire. The British counterattack and destroy 10 Italian divisions in 2 months. Hitler has to send reinforcements or watch his only major ally collapse in humiliation. The Africa Corps arrives in February 1941. Rommel in command. 2 divisions. Supposed to be a holding action. Rommel doesn't hold. He attacks. Drives the British back across Libya. Lays siege to Tobruk. Becomes a media darling back in Germany. The Desert Fox. Brilliant tactician. Master of maneuver warfare. And completely unsupported by Berlin, because Hitler still thinks North Africa doesn't matter. The Africa Corps never gets the reinforcements it needs. Supply convoys have to cross the Mediterranean under constant attack by the RAF and the Royal Navy. Half the fuel and ammunition sent to North Africa ends up on the bottom of the sea. Rommel's logistics are a nightmare. His tanks run out of fuel in the middle of battles. His artillery runs out of shells. And he keeps attacking anyway, because that's what Rommel does. The British bring in Montgomery. Methodical, cautious, fights only when he has overwhelming superiority. The opposite of Rommel in every way. And he has something Rommel doesn't: supplies. Endless American supplies. Shermans by the hundreds, fuel by the tanker load. Artillery shells stacked higher than a man. El Alamein, October 1942. Montgomery has twice as many tanks and 3 times as many guns. Rommel has fuel for 3 days of combat and barely enough ammunition for a sustained barrage. The battle isn't close. The Afrika Korps breaks, retreats across Libya, then Tunisia, and then the Americans land in Morocco and Algeria. Operation Torch, November 8th. The Afrika Korps is now trapped between 2 Allied armies with the sea at its back. Hitler's response? Pour more troops into Tunisia. Not to win, to delay the inevitable. 250,000 men shipped across the Mediterranean just in time to be surrounded and forced to surrender in May 1943. The second catastrophic loss in 3 months after Stalingrad. Another entire army gone. For nothing. The Allies used North Africa as a staging ground to invade Sicily, then Italy. Mussolini gets overthrown and arrested by his own government. The Italians switch sides. Hitler has to occupy the entire country to keep it from falling to the Allies. More divisions tied down, more resources drained away. Another front that didn't have to exist. Every man sent to Africa or Italy was a man not sent to Russia. Every tank lost in the desert was a tank that could have fought at Kursk. And Hitler kept feeding the furnace because pulling out felt like admitting defeat. The theme builds. Overextension, refusal to retreat, symbolic objectives prioritized over strategic sense. And beneath it all, the same pathology. Hitler trusted his own instincts more than his general's maps. It's about to get worse. Kursk is the last time Germany gets to choose where the battle happens. After this, they only react. The Eastern Front has stabilized into a line after Stalingrad. The Soviets hold a massive bulge around the city of Kursk, a salient sticking out into German-held territory. A tactical temptation. Pinch it off from both sides, encircle and destroy everything inside. Classic maneuver warfare. The kind of operation the Wehrmacht used to do in its sleep. Operation Citadel, summer 1943. Hitler delays it for months to wait for new tanks. The Panther, the Tiger, heavy armor that's supposed to break the Soviet defenses. The delay gives the Soviets time to prepare. They know the attack is coming. They know exactly where it's coming. Soviet intelligence has a source inside the German High Command feeding them everything. The Soviets dig in. 3 defensive lines. Minefields so dense you can't walk 10 meters without hitting one. Anti-tank ditches, bunkers, artillery zeroed in on every approach. And they wait. The Germans attack on July 5th. Largest tank battle in history. 3,000 armored vehicles in a space smaller than some counties. And the panzers drive straight into a meat grinder. For every kilometer gained, hundreds of men die. Tigers and Panthers break down or get immobilized by mines. Soviet anti-tank guns wreck them from dug-in positions. The infantry gets chewed apart by machine gun fire from bunkers they can't even see. A week in, the Germans have advanced maybe 15 kilometers. At that rate, they'll reach the objective sometime next year. And then the Soviets counterattack. Not at Kursk, farther north. They slam into the German lines near Orel and break through. The whole offensive has to be called off to deal with the breach. Germany never attacks again on the Eastern Front. From Kursk onward, it's retreat. Sometimes controlled, usually not. The Soviets steamroll west, retake Ukraine, retake Belarus. By the summer of 1944, they're crossing into Poland. The Wehrmacht is still fighting, still inflicting casualties. But the momentum is gone, and it's never coming back. And here's the operational insanity that turns retreat into rout. Hitler's fortress strategy. Cities designated as fortresses must be held to the last man. No evacuation, no breakout. Commanders who suggest withdrawal get relieved or shot. The fortresses become death traps. Entire divisions encircled, starved out, obliterated. The Soviets don't even have to assault most of them. Just bypass the fortress and keep advancing. Leave a screening force to make sure nobody gets out. The trapped Germans sit there eating their horses while the Red Army takes the next 3 cities.
How did they manage this?
By January 1945, the Soviets are on the Oder River, less than 100 kilometers from Berlin. The German Eastern Front has disintegrated. Entire army groups ceasing to exist as coherent formations. Soldiers fleeing west in mobs. And Hitler is still moving pins on a map in a bunker, ordering counterattacks by divisions that no longer have enough men to fill a battalion. The generals stop telling him the truth because the truth gets you executed. They report phantom divisions, fictional fuel reserves, reinforcements that don't exist. And Hitler believes it because he needs to believe it. Reality has become optional. The entire command structure is a cargo cult by this point, going through the motions of strategy with no connection to the actual war. The Atlantic Wall was supposed to make France unconquerable. It made D-Day harder. That's it. Rommel gets pulled from North Africa and put in charge of defending the French coast. He surveys the fortifications and realizes they're a propaganda myth. Concrete bunkers at intervals, beach obstacles, barbed wire. It looks impressive on newsreels, but the gaps are enormous. Entire stretches of coastline barely defended, and the Wehrmacht divisions stationed in France are either second-rate garrison troops or burned-out units pulled from the Eastern Front to rest and refit. Rommel does what he can. More mines, more obstacles, flooding low-lying fields to limit where paratroopers can land. He knows the only chance is to destroy the invasion on the beaches in the first 48 hours. If the Allies get a foothold and bring their logistics ashore, it's over. Germany can't win a grinding positional battle in the West while the Soviets are annihilating the East. He begs Hitler for permission to position the panzer divisions close to the coast. Have them ready to counterattack immediately. Hitler says no. The panzers stay inland, under central command. They won't move without his personal authorization. Rommel's authority ends at the waterline. June 6, 1944. The Allies land. 5 beaches. Airborne drops on both flanks. The Atlantic Wall holds in some places. Omaha Beach is a slaughterhouse. American troops pinned down under withering fire. But they get off the beach. And at Utah and Gold and Juneau and Sword, the defenses crack faster. By nightfall, 150,000 men are ashore. Rommel requests the panzer reserves. The request has to go to Hitler. Hitler is asleep. His staff won't wake him. The Führer was up late and needs his rest. The authorization doesn't come until mid-afternoon. By then, Allied air power owns the sky. The panzers move in daylight and get shredded by typhoons and thunderbolts. Supply columns obliterated. Entire battalions caught on the road and turned into burning scrap. The counterattack that might have worked at dawn happens at dusk and fails. The Allies break out of the beachhead, sweep across France. The Wehrmacht fights delaying actions, loses them, loses the men, loses the equipment. Paris falls in August. By September, the Allies are at the German border. The war in the West is supposed to be over by Christmas. It isn't. The Germans stabilize the line one more time, shorten their supply lines, husband their last reserves. And Hitler comes up with one final offensive, the Ardennes, December 1944. The same forest where the Germans broke through in 1940. Hitler's plan: punch through the American lines, drive to Antwerp, cut off the Allied supply port, force a negotiated peace in the West so Germany can focus everything on holding the Soviets. It's delusional on every level, but he orders it anyway. Strips the Eastern Front of every reserve, every last panzer, every drop of fuel. The offensive has enough supplies for 4 days of combat. The plan assumes they'll capture Allied fuel depots to keep going. The attack launches in fog and snow, catches the Americans by surprise. The Germans advance 50 kilometers in the first 2 days, surround an entire American division at Bastogne. It looks like 1940 again. Blitzkrieg, lightning war. Then the weather clears. Allied air power comes back. The fuel runs out. The panzers are abandoned on the side of the road, and the Americans counterattack with fresh divisions Germany can't match. The Battle of the Bulge collapses. Every tank lost, every elite unit wrecked. And for what? A 2-week delay. The resources spent on the Ardennes could have held the Eastern Front for months. Instead, they bought nothing. When the Soviets launched their winter offensive in January, there's nothing left to stop them. This is the part where the Reich doesn't just lose. It ceases to exist as a functional state. The final collapse happens faster than anyone predicted. The Soviets cross the Oder in April. 1.5 million men, 6,000 tanks, 40,000 artillery pieces. The preliminary barrage is so intense it registers on seismographs in Sweden. The German defenders are old men and children. Volkssturm militia armed with rifles from the last war and Panzerfausts they barely know how to use. Berlin's defense is organized by officers who haven't slept in days and are making decisions based on maps that no longer correspond to reality. Divisions that exist only on paper get orders to counterattack. The men receiving the orders are 14-year-old Hitler youth and 50-year-old postal workers. The Soviets encircle the city. Then, they fight their way in, block by block. The Red Army has done this before. Stalingrad taught them urban warfare. They blow holes in buildings and move through the walls instead of the streets. Flamethrowers, satchel charges, tank guns fired point-blank through windows. The German defenders fight from the rubble with a desperation that borders on psychotic, because they know what's coming if they surrender. Hitler is in the Führer bunker beneath the Reich Chancellery. 50 feet of concrete and steel, maps on the walls showing unit positions from 3 weeks ago. He's still issuing orders. Army Group Steiner will attack from the north. General Wenck will relieve Berlin from the southwest. They're on their way. Hold out a little longer. Army Group Steiner doesn't exist. Wenck's army is a shattered remnant with no fuel and no ammunition. The staff officers in the bunker know this. They don't tell him. What's the point? On April 30th, Soviet troops are 2 blocks away. Hitler marries his mistress, dictates his will, blames the Jews for the war, blames the German people for not being strong enough to win it, takes a cyanide capsule and shoots himself in the head simultaneously because he doesn't trust the poison alone. His bodyguards burn the corpse in a shell crater outside the bunker. The Soviets find the remains 3 days later, charred beyond recognition. They identify him by his dental records. The jaw is intact enough to match to his dentist's charts. The war in Europe ends a week later. Germany signs unconditional surrender on May 8th. The Reich that was supposed to last 1,000 years lasted 12. The human cost is almost incomprehensible. 60 million dead worldwide. 27 million Soviet citizens. 6 million Jews murdered in the camps. 500,000 Allied troops. 5 million German soldiers. 2 million German civilians. Cities erased. Entire populations displaced. A continent in ruins. And the question remains, how did Hitler lose? The military answer is overextension, strategic rigidity, refusal to adapt, catastrophic decision-making at every level, and a command structure so dysfunctional it turned battlefield victories into strategic defeats. But the deeper answer is simpler. He lost because he thought willpower could replace logistics, because he trusted his instincts over his general's expertise, because he refused to retreat even when retreat was the only rational move, because he prioritized symbolic victories over strategic objectives, because he spent the war fighting the war he wanted instead of the war he had. Every major German defeat follows the same pattern. Advance until overextended, ignore the warnings, refuse to pull back, watch the position collapse, blame everyone except the man giving the orders. Stalingrad, Kursk, Normandy, the Bulge. The same script every time. And every time, the price gets higher. By the end, the Wehrmacht had been bled so dry that the final defense of Berlin was mounted by children and the elderly. The Luftwaffe had pilots, but no fuel. The factories were still producing tanks that would never leave the assembly line because there was no fuel to move them and no trained crews to operate them. Hitler spent the last months of his life in a bunker, moving phantom armies on a map, issuing orders to units that no longer existed, convinced that secret weapons and unbreakable will would turn the tide. He died believing he'd been betrayed by his generals, by the German people, by fate itself. He was never betrayed. He was simply wrong about everything. And 60 million people paid the price for his certainty. The ruins of Berlin in May 1945 look like the surface of an alien planet. Entire neighborhoods reduced to rubble, bodies in the streets, the smell of death so thick it coats your throat. Soviet soldiers wander through the wreckage looking for anything that might explain how this happened. They find the bunker. They find the remains. They find the ashes. And in the silence after the guns stop, one fact becomes clear. The Third Reich didn't fall because it was beaten by superior force. It fell because it beat itself. The Allies just had to survive long enough to watch it happen. The atomic program that never was tells you everything about how Germany lost this war. In 1938, two German scientists discover nuclear fission in a Berlin laboratory. Otto Hahn and Fritz Strassmann. They split the uranium atom. The paper they publish is the starting gun for every nuclear weapons program that follows. The Germans have a 2-year head start on the Americans. 2 years. And they throw it away. Here's what happens. The Reich Research Council looks at the preliminary calculations, determines that a functional bomb would require resources Germany doesn't have. Industrial capacity tied up elsewhere. Uranium supplies limited. The timeline stretches to years, maybe a decade. Hitler needs weapons he can use now. The nuclear program gets downgraded. Skeleton funding. Scientists reassigned to more immediate projects. Meanwhile, the United States starts the Manhattan Project in 1942, pours $2 billion into it, builds entire cities in the desert just to enrich uranium, employs 130,000 people, and detonates a working bomb in July 1945, 3 months after Hitler dies. If Germany had committed the same resources, if Hitler had understood what his scientists were telling him, if the program had stayed on track, the war ends differently. Maybe Germany gets the bomb first. Maybe the Allies do, but the race is close enough that the threat alone changes everything. Maybe Hitler has leverage for a negotiated peace. But he doesn't understand. Can't understand. His worldview doesn't have room for physics he can't see. He wants rockets that can hit London because rockets are visible. They make noise. They produce terror you can film for newsreels. A bomb that requires invisible particles and mathematics? That's Jewish physics. Degenerate science, not real German thinking. So the program dies. The scientists scatter. Some defect. Some get drafted. Werner Heisenberg, the one physicist who might have made it work, spends the war running a neutered project that never gets close. The Alsos mission enters Germany in 1945 and discovers that the Nazi atomic program was years behind. Not even close. They'd been moving in circles. One good decision, one funding allocation, and the entire shape of the war changes. But Hitler couldn't make that decision because it required trusting people smarter than him about things he didn't understand. That's not a small detail. That's the entire problem compressed into one program. The intelligence failures are just as catastrophic. German military intelligence spent the whole war feeding Hitler fantasy. The Abwehr, the Wehrmacht intelligence service, was partially run by people who wanted Hitler to lose. Wilhelm Canaris, the head of the Abwehr, was in contact with British intelligence. Not a full defector, more complicated than that, but absolutely not loyal. And the information flowing up to the Führer was contaminated from the source. Before D-Day, German intelligence convinced Hitler the invasion would come at Calais, the narrowest point of the Channel, the obvious place. The Allies ran an elaborate deception campaign to reinforce that belief. Fake armies, false radio traffic, double agents feeding bad information. And the Germans believed all of it because it confirmed what they already thought. Even after the Normandy landings, Hitler kept divisions at Calais for weeks, waiting for the real invasion, the one that was never coming. Those divisions could have turned Normandy into a bloodbath. Instead, they sat on empty beaches guarding against ghosts. The Eastern Front was worse. German intelligence consistently underestimated Soviet strength, reported Red Army divisions as depleted when they were at full strength, missed entire Soviet armies moving into position. The attack that broke through at Stalingrad shouldn't have been a surprise. Soviet troop movements were obvious if anyone had been paying attention. But the reports going to Hitler's desk said the Soviets were exhausted, incapable of major offensive operations. Days later, 300,000 Germans were in a pocket. And when reports contradicted the narrative Hitler wanted, they got ignored, or the officer reporting them got relieved. General Gehlen, head of Foreign Armies East, learned to shade his intelligence assessments to match what Hitler wanted to hear. Not lies exactly, just emphasis shifted. Numbers rounded in favorable directions. Uncertainty presented as confidence. Because accurate pessimism got you fired, and optimistic fantasy kept you employed. By 1944, German intelligence wasn't even pretending anymore. They were telling Hitler the Western Allies were on the verge of collapse, internal political divisions about to tear them apart, the Anglo-American alliance ready to fracture. Any day now, the British and Americans would realize the real enemy was the Soviets, and Germany could broker a separate peace. It never happened. The alliance held, and Hitler kept waiting for a split that wasn't coming, because his intelligence services told him what he wanted to hear. You can't win a war when you don't know where the enemy is or what he's doing. And you definitely can't win when your own intelligence apparatus is either incompetent or actively sabotaging you. The economic collapse runs underneath everything else like rot in the foundation. Germany's war economy was always a shell game, smoke and mirrors held together with slave labor and plunder. The early conquests masked the problem. Poland's gold, French industrial capacity, Belgian factories, Soviet grain and oil from the occupied territories. As long as Germany kept winning, they could loot enough to keep the machine running. But a war economy built on theft stops working when you stop conquering. And by 1943, Germany wasn't conquering anymore. They were losing ground, losing resources, losing the territories they've been draining. The oil situation alone should have ended the war. Germany had almost no domestic oil production. The Romanian fields at Ploiești supplied most of what the Wehrmacht used. The Soviets bombed Ploiești into rubble in 1944. Production collapsed. Synthetic fuel plants inside Germany got hit by Allied bombers. By early 1945, the Luftwaffe had planes that couldn't fly for lack of fuel. Panzer divisions immobilized, U-boats stuck in port. And the Nazis' answer to every shortage was slave labor. Work people to death and replace them. Concentration camp inmates, Soviet prisoners of war, civilians from occupied territories rounded up and shipped to factories. 12 million forced laborers at the peak. Worked in conditions that killed them in months. The efficiency was terrible. Starving people don't build good tanks. Sabotage was constant. Parts installed incorrectly on purpose. Bolts left loose. Electrical systems wired wrong. A Tiger tank built by slave labor had maybe a 50-50 chance of actually working when it rolled off the line. And the ones that worked broke down faster because the quality control was non-existent. Albert Speer gets credit for keeping production up. What he actually did was cook the books and work people to death faster. Production numbers looked good on paper. In reality, the equipment reaching the front was increasingly garbage. And there were never enough spare parts because the supply chain was a nightmare. Here's a specific example of how broken it was. The Panther tank, one of the better designs Germany fielded, required regular maintenance. engine overhauls every 1,500 kilometers. The gearbox was fragile and needed constant adjustment. In 1943, the average Panther lasted 300 kilometers before breaking down. Not destroyed in combat, just broke. Mechanical failure. And there weren't enough repair depots or spare parts to fix them all. So the crews abandoned them. Hundreds of Panthers left on the side of roads across Europe. Not because they got hit, because they stopped moving, and there was no way to get them running again. That's what a collapsing economy looks like at the sharp end. Your best weapons turning into roadside scrap because you can't make a gearbox that lasts. The Kriegsmarine, the German Navy, spent the entire war achieving nothing. Surface fleet was impressive on paper. Battleships like the Bismarck and the Tirpitz, heavy cruisers, destroyers. But they were outnumbered 10-1 by the Royal Navy and couldn't leave port without risking destruction. The Bismarck's first and only combat operation ended with the ship at the bottom of the Atlantic after 3 days. The Tirpitz spent most of the war hiding in Norwegian fjords until British bombers finally sank her in 1944. The U-boat campaign was more effective. For a while. Wolfpack tactics, convoy ambushes. In 1942, German submarines were sinking Allied shipping faster than it could be replaced. 8 million tons sent to the bottom. The Atlantic supply line was genuinely threatened. Then the Allies adapted. Better sonar, escort carriers, long-range patrol aircraft that could cover the mid-Atlantic gap, depth charges that actually worked. Convoy tactics improved, and critically, the Allies broke the German naval codes. They knew where the U-boats were going before the U-boats got there. By 1943, the tables flipped. U-boats started dying faster than they could be built. 785 U-boats lost during the war. 30,000 submariners killed out of a force of 40,000. 75% casualties. The highest death rate of any service branch in any military during the entire war. And they kept sending them out. Boats with green crews. Obsolete technology. No air cover. Into waters where Allied hunters were waiting. The U-boat service turned into a suicide force, and the tonnage they sank after 1943 didn't justify the losses. Hitler's obsession with surface raiders wasted resources that could have gone into more U-boats, or into defensive measures, or into anything else. The Kriegsmarine's capital ships were propaganda tools that spent the war in port or on the ocean floor. Germany needed to cut Britain off from American supplies to have any chance. The Navy failed completely. By 1944, the Atlantic was an Allied highway. Millions of tons of material flooding in Britain. Fuel, food, ammunition, tanks, planes. The buildup for D-Day happened in plain sight, and the Kriegsmarine couldn't do anything about it. Control of the sea was gone, which meant control of global resources was gone, which meant Germany was fighting a war of attrition it could never win. The Allied strategic bombing campaign, the part we haven't talked about yet, targeted something more important than cities. The Schweinfurt raids, August and October 1943. The target? Ball-bearing factories. Schweinfurt produced over half of Germany's ball bearings. Every tank, every plane, every vehicle needed them. Take out Schweinfurt, and the entire war machine grinds to a halt. That was the theory. The 8th Air Force sent hundreds of B-17s deep into Germany without fighter escort. The P-51 Mustang couldn't reach that far yet. The bombers went alone, and the Luftwaffe slaughtered them. 60 bombers lost in the first raid, 77 in the second. 600 men dead or captured in a single day. The losses were so catastrophic the Americans stopped daylight bombing deep into Germany for months. But the factories got hit. Production dropped. Not as much as the Allies hoped. Spear dispersed manufacturing, increased imports from Sweden and Switzerland, cannibalized bearings from captured equipment. The shortage never became critical, but it was close. Then the Allies started hitting synthetic oil plants. That's what broke the Wehrmacht's back. Germany had no domestic oil. Synthetic plants converted coal into fuel. The plants were large, hard to hide, easy to target, and irreplaceable. Starting in May 1944, the Allies hit every synthetic fuel plant they could find. Luna, Politz, Blechhammer, Merseburg. The raids were relentless, and this time they worked. Fuel production collapsed. In September, output was down 75%. The panzers stopped moving. Luftwaffe sortie rates plummeted. Pilot training got cut because there was no fuel for practice flights. New pilots went into combat with maybe 30 hours of flight time. Allied pilots had 300. The kill ratios became a joke. Experienced German aces would shoot down 4 or 5 Allied planes and then watch their wingmen, kids who barely knew how to take off, get shredded. The transportation campaign finished it. Bridges, rail yards, marshalling stations, canals. Every choke point in the logistics network got hit. Supplies piled up at depots because there was no way to move them. Factories kept producing, but the equipment never reached the front. Troops went hungry because food convoys couldn't get through. By early 1945, the German economy was technically still functioning but operationally dead. The pieces no longer connected. A tank factory in Kassel might be running full shifts, but the tanks sat in the yard with no fuel and no way to transport them. An artillery unit at the front might have the guns but no shells because the ammunition train got strafed. It's not one thing that kills the Reich's ability to fight. It's everything at once. A systemic collapse where every problem makes the others worse. The wonder weapons Hitler kept promising were real. They just came too late and in too few numbers to matter. The V-2 rocket was a genuine technical achievement, the first ballistic missile. It launched from mobile platforms, flew faster than sound, and hit targets 100 kilometers away. No defense existed. You couldn't shoot it down or intercept it. The explosion was the first warning you got. 3,000 V-2s were launched at Allied targets, mostly London and Antwerp. They killed about 9,000 people. Each missile cost as much as a heavy bomber. Each one carried a single ton of explosives. A Lancaster bomber could carry 5 tons and be used again the next night. The V-2 program consumed resources that could have built thousands of fighter planes. The production facilities were underground factories staffed by concentration camp slaves. 20,000 laborers died building the rockets. More people died making them than were killed by them. Strategically pointless. Tactically impressive. A perfect symbol of Nazi priorities. The Me-262 jet fighter was better. Twin-engine jet. Faster than any Allied plane. Heavily armed. Could have devastated bomber formations if deployed correctly. Test pilots who flew it said it felt like fighting from the future. Hitler ordered it converted into a fighter bomber. Wasted months of production time modifying the design. By the time it reached frontline service in numbers, the Luftwaffe had no fuel and no experienced pilots. The jets flew maybe 25 missions each before mechanical failure or enemy fire brought them down. Imagine if the Me-262 had been mass-produced in 1943 as a pure interceptor. Imagine 1,000 of them tearing apart Allied bomber streams. The air war might have lasted another year, maybe longer. But Hitler wanted a bomber that could hit London faster. So the jet became a propaganda piece instead of a war winner. The Type 21 U-boat was the first real submarine. Every previous sub was just a surface ship that could dive for short periods. The Type 21 could stay underwater for days, faster submerged than on the surface. Sophisticated sonar, hydraulic torpedo reloading. Could fire a full spread, reload, and fire again without surfacing. If the Type 21 had entered service in 1943, the Battle of the Atlantic might have gone differently. But the first operational boat launched in 1945. After the war was already lost, a few went on patrols. None engaged in combat before the surrender. Pattern recognition time. Germany kept developing weapons for the war they'd already lost instead of the war they were currently fighting. chasing technical sophistication when they needed numbers, building rockets when they needed trucks, designing super tanks when they needed more regular tanks and the fuel to run them. The last wonder weapon was the atomic bomb Germany never built. We've covered that. But there was also a chemical weapons program. Nerve agents, taboon and sarin, incredibly lethal. Germany had stockpiles that could have killed millions. They never used them. Why? Because Hitler remembered being gassed in the First World War. Personal trauma overriding strategic calculation. Also because German generals knew the Allies would retaliate with their own chemical weapons, and Germany's civilian population was more vulnerable. Densely packed cities, no gas masks for everyone, limited shelter space. So the most horrific weapons in the arsenal sat in bunkers until Soviet troops found them in 1945. Unused. One of the few war crimes Hitler didn't commit. The Japanese alliance was worse than having no alliance at all. The tripartite pact signed in 1940 looked strong on paper. Germany, Italy, Japan. Three major powers dividing the world. Europe and Africa for Germany and Italy. Asia and the Pacific for Japan. Mutual defense. Shared goals. In practice, barely coordinated. No joint strategic planning. No shared intelligence. No unified command. Germany and Japan were fighting separate wars on opposite sides of the planet and barely talking to each other. Japan attacks Pearl Harbor in December 1941, brings America into the war. Germany isn't consulted. Find out when everyone else does. Hitler declares war on the United States 4 days later because the treaty requires it. Strategic suicide. He's now fighting the British Empire, the Soviet Union, and the United States simultaneously, the three largest industrial powers on Earth. Why declare war? He didn't have to. The treaty's mutual defense clause only triggered if a member was attacked. Japan attacked first. Germany could have stayed neutral with America. Let Japan and the US slug it out in the Pacific. Keep American focus away from Europe. But Hitler declared war anyway. Partly because he thought Japan would tie down American resources. Partly because U-boats were already sinking American ships and he wanted it formalized. Mostly because he was an idiot. Japan's war in China drained resources that might have threatened the Soviets. Instead of attacking Siberia from the east, forcing Stalin to fight a two-front war, Japan went south. Pearl Harbor, Philippines, Southeast Asia, oil fields in the Dutch East Indies. If Japan had invaded Siberia in 1941 while Germany was at the gates of Moscow, the Soviet Union probably collapses. Stalin couldn't defend both fronts. The Siberian divisions that saved Moscow would have been fighting Japan instead. But Japan and Germany never synchronized. Japan's goals were regional conquest and resources. Germany's goals were racial empire and Lebensraum. The two programs didn't align. And neither side cared enough about the other's war to actually help. German U-boats operated in the Pacific. Barely. A handful of boats. Token presence. Japan sent submarines to the Atlantic. 2 of them. Both sank without doing anything. The Italian Navy contributed more to the Pacific theater than that, which is to say, nothing. Technology sharing happened. Eventually. Years late. German jet engine designs shipped to Japan by submarine. Took 6 months to arrive. By the time Japanese engineers saw them, the war had moved on. Japanese radar technology sent to Germany. Decent systems. Germany didn't implement them widely because they'd already committed to different designs. The most useful thing Japan did for Germany was keep America busy, but even that was a disaster. Because American industrial capacity was so overwhelming that they fought a 2-ocean war, supplied the British and Soviets with Lend-Lease, and still built up enough force to invade France. Japan brought America into the war and gave Germany nothing in return except a symbolic alliance that meant less than the paper it was printed on. The Italian alliance was somehow worse. Mussolini's military was a paper tiger, poorly equipped, badly led, low morale. They lost to Greece. Greece, a country with 1/10 the population and almost no modern military. The Italian invasion of Greece in 1940 turned into a rout. The Greeks counterattacked and pushed into Albania. Hitler had to bail Mussolini out. German troops conquered Yugoslavia and Greece in 3 weeks. More forces tied down in the Balkans. More delays before Barbarossa. North Africa we've covered. Rommel sent to save the Italians from total collapse in Libya. Everything that followed was trying to prop up an ally who couldn't defend himself. Italy switches sides in 1943, signs an armistice with the Allies. Mussolini gets arrested by his own government. The king orders him held in a mountain resort hotel. Hitler sends Otto Skorzeny, special forces, to rescue him. They fly in with gliders, snatch Mussolini, and fly him to Germany. Propaganda victory. Strategically pointless. Mussolini gets installed as the puppet leader of the Italian Social Republic, a rump state in northern Italy, German-occupied territory pretending to be an independent country. It controls nothing, contributes nothing, collapses immediately when the Allies push north. Meanwhile, Germany has to occupy the entire Italian peninsula to keep it from falling to the Allies. 20 divisions. Divisions that could have been in France for D-Day or on the Eastern Front holding back the Soviets. Instead, they're in Italy fighting a grinding defensive campaign up the boot. Cassino, Anzio, the Gothic Line. Every mile costs casualties Germany can't replace. The Italian campaign ties down Allied forces too. That's true. But Germany loses far more from having to defend Italy than the Allies lose from attacking it. The Wehrmacht bleeds out in mountains and rivers, while the Allies advance slowly and methodically with overwhelming firepower. Italy as an ally weakened Germany more than if Italy had stayed neutral. Every resource spent propping Mussolini was a resource not spent on the real war. The Holocaust consumed resources Germany couldn't spare. The final solution wasn't a sideshow. It was a major logistical operation running parallel to the war effort. It drained resources the Wehrmacht desperately needed. The Einsatzgruppen, mobile killing squads, followed the Wehrmacht into the Soviet Union. 4 units, 3,000 men. Their job was to murder every Jew, communist, and intellectual in the occupied territories. They shot over 1 million people in the first year. Bullets, pistols, rifles, ammunition that could have gone to the front. Then the death camps. Auschwitz, Treblinka, Sobibor, Belzec. Industrial murder. The infrastructure required was enormous. Rail transport to move millions of people, camps to process them, guards to staff the facilities, Zyklon B gas to kill them, crematoria to dispose of the bodies. All of that required resources. Steel for the rail lines, fuel for the trains, concrete for the buildings, manpower for the guards. And every bit of it was taken from an economy already stretched to breaking. The counterargument. The Holocaust also involved looting, confiscated property, stolen valuables, Jewish assets seized and funneled into the Reich treasury, gold teeth melted down, hair cut from corpses and used to stuff mattresses. Even the ashes were used as fertilizer. But the return didn't justify the cost. The administrative apparatus, the manpower, the logistical nightmare of moving millions of people across Europe while fighting a multi-front war. If those resources had gone to the military, Germany fights more effectively. Not better enough to win, but better. Here's the darker calculation. The forced labor from the camps did contribute to the war economy. Slaves building V-2 rockets, slaves working in factories, slaves digging tunnels and fortifications. The Nazis worked people to death and called it productivity. But slaves don't work well. They sabotage, they resist, they die before they're useful. And the camps required guards and administrators and logistical support. Every guard detail was a soldier not at the front. The Holocaust happened because the Nazi ideology demanded it, not because it helped Germany win. It was the point of the war. not a means to victory. And it consumed resources Germany didn't have. The moral calculation is obvious. The strategic calculation is almost as damning. Germany pursued genocide while losing a war for survival, prioritized racial murder over military necessity, and died doing both. The very end comes faster than expected. By April 1945, the Reich controls less territory than it did in 1938. The Soviets are in Berlin. The Americans and British are across the Rhine. German units still fighting are isolated pockets with no communication, no supplies, and no hope. The final battle in Berlin lasts 2 weeks, street by street, building by building. The Soviets use massive artillery barrages to level entire blocks before the infantry moves in. German defenders are Volkssturm militia, Hitler Youth, and whatever Wehrmacht stragglers can be scraped together. They fight with the energy of the damned, not because they believe in victory, because they know what's coming. The Red Army doesn't take many prisoners in Berlin, not after what they found when they liberated the eastern camps, not after seeing what the Wehrmacht did to Soviet cities. The fighting is brutal and personal. Flamethrowers, grenades, hand-to-hand in the rubble. Hitler shoots himself on April 30th. His successor, Admiral Dönitz, tries to negotiate a conditional surrender. The Allies say no, unconditional only. Germany signs on May 7th. Fighting stops on May 8th at midnight. Some units don't get the word. Keep fighting for days. Small pockets in Czechoslovakia and Austria. Isolated garrisons in Norway and the Channel Islands. Eventually, they all surrender or get overrun. The country that started the war no longer exists. Germany is divided into occupation zones: Soviet, American, British, French. The borders are erased, the government dissolved, the military disbanded, the entire state apparatus dismantled. 12 years. From the moment Hitler takes power in 1933 to the moment the Reich ceases to exist in 1945. 12 years of a 1,000-year empire. The human cost is beyond comprehension. 60 million dead globally, 27 million Soviet citizens, 6 million Jews murdered in the Holocaust, 5 million German soldiers, millions more wounded, entire cities destroyed, populations displaced, the map of Europe redrawn. And the question that haunts every analysis: was it inevitable? Could Germany have won? If Hitler had made different choices? The answer is no. Not after 1941. Probably not even before that. The moment Germany invaded the Soviet Union, the war became unwinnable. The Soviet Union had too much space, too many people, too many resources. Germany could win battles and still lose the war, which is exactly what happened. The moment Japan bombed Pearl Harbor and Hitler declared war on America, it was over. The United States had an industrial capacity Germany couldn't match. American factories outproduced the entire Axis combined. 16 million men under arms, a 2-ocean navy, strategic bombing fleets that could reach any target. Once America fully mobilized, German defeat was a question of when, not if. But even before that, the structural problems were fatal. Germany's war economy was built on plunder. The ideology was self-destructive. The command structure was dysfunctional. Hitler's strategic judgment was catastrophic. Better decisions would have prolonged the war, made it bloodier, cost more lives, but wouldn't have changed the outcome. Germany was outnumbered, outproduced, and outfought once the initial advantages of surprise and preparation wore off. The Wehrmacht was an excellent tactical force. On a unit-for-unit basis, German soldiers were probably the best trained and most effective fighters in the war. But tactics don't beat strategy, and strategy doesn't beat resources. And resources don't beat making an enemy out of everyone simultaneously. Hitler lost World War II because he started a war he couldn't win, and then made every decision necessary to guarantee defeat. Overextended the forces, refused to adapt, trusted his instincts over expertise, prioritized ideology over reality, fought the war he imagined instead of the war that existed, and 60 million people died learning that lesson. The ruins of Berlin in 1945 are a monument to certainty. Hitler was certain he was right, certain he understood military strategy better than his generals, certain willpower could overcome logistics, certain Germany's racial superiority would guarantee victory. He was wrong about all of it, and the price of that certainty was the complete destruction of everything he claimed to be fighting for. The Reich that was supposed to last 1,000 years burned down in 12. The master race drowned in the blood of its own soldiers. The empire built on conquest collapsed under its own weight, and in the ruins, among the ashes and the bodies and the broken concrete, one truth becomes inescapable. The Third Reich didn't fall because it was defeated by superior force. It fell because it was designed to fail. The ideology was a suicide pact. The strategy was self-destruction with extra steps. And Hitler was the architect of his own annihilation. The question isn't how Hitler lost World War II. The question is how anyone ever thought he could win.